I have such a weird situationship with the Yakuza franchise. If you'd ask me about them in a casual conversation, I'd say that I liked the games that I've played, but every time I begin a new entry, I enjoy it until I randomly end up dropping it about a third of the way through. Mostly because the idea of completing the entire story becomes a bit overbearing, leading me to say I'll come back to it later, knowing damn well that I never will, only for the cycle to repeat every other year. I say all that not to rag on the franchise, but to emphasize the importance that I not only completed Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii after about 20-ish hours, but it's also firmly one of my new favorite games. I also gave that preamble since a lot of people are going to be talking about this game from the perspective of a die-hard Yakuza fan, or at least from the perspective of people who have an understanding of modern Yakuza / Like a Dragon lore. Something I clearly lack. I'm obviously aware of who Goro Majima is and why he's interesting on a surface level, but I was much more drawn in by the pirate setting. And understandably, at first, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, the 12th canonical installment in the series, seems like a terrible fucking place to start. Except it sort of seems like I'm a part of the other demographic that Ryu Ga Gotoku Studio is aiming for, since this game's inciting incident and excuse for being a pirate game after all of the fucking installments that we've had is that Majima has amnesia, sort of giving him a hall pass to do whatever he wants. And outside some of the connections to Infinite Wealth, as well as a few well-known side characters near the end, like Saejima, spoilers, I guess. This is a game that could be very easily enjoyed as a standalone experience, and the story very much treats it as such. Majima is washed ashore with no memories, and is saved by a boy named Noah and his pet tiger Goro on the beach. And from there, he meets Noah's dad, Jason, who's a former pirate himself, and eventually, after a bunch of cutscenes, you get a ship and amass a motley crew of mostly one-off characters, all with varying levels of likability, all to find this legendary buried treasure that also contains the elixir of eternal life that pretty much everyone wants for completely different reasons. I haven't read any reviews yet, but I'm assuming that people are going to be calling this the simplest Yakuza story ever, and that's not really a bad thing. I don't think a spin-off should force itself to be the length of a full title in the franchise, or tie itself to the mainline games more than what's necessary. If you're going into this game expecting a 30-hour story that furthers the universe in so many different ways, you have no fucking clue what this game is. If the rest of the Yakuza series are crime soap operas with moments of brevity in between it, Pirate Yakuza is like a blockbuster romp about pillaging and swashbuckling from beginning to end. While there are some minor twists or surprises and some very interesting tonal choices, it is a straightforward story about becoming a well-known pirate crew and looking for ancient treasure. Nothing more, nothing less. But it's still got this air of charm that RGG is very good at. Hell, the game begins with Majima telling us the story in retrospect on a fucking soundstage. The very first thing you see after getting your ship and completing the prologue is not sailing the open seas, it's a fucking musical sequence where all the crew on the Goromaru sing and dance, and the end of the game is also capped off with another dancing sequence. There is some interesting thematic stuff in the story about dreams and what it means to leave behind a better world for those that you love. And I thought that the friendship between Majima and Noah was well done as the sort of heart of the game. Although it's kinda odd that the rich family has all these troublesome familial connections that don't really go anywhere, like Noah's sisters, Naomi and Moana, who have very minor roles and honestly could have been consolidated into one character probably, as well as their mother, who you meet like one time and that sort of goes nowhere. She's never seen or even brought up after this ever again. Also, the villains all pretty much feel like cardboard cutouts, and the game tries to make up for their lack of presence with lots of monologuing. And I think a lot of the side characters you're supposed to become attached to, like Masaru, sort of lack any depth beyond what you see in the opening hours. But I at least bought the sense of camaraderie that the game instills from the beginning of the story. That's not to say that this game doesn't have great moments. I even cried a little bit towards the end. Or maybe it was the onions. I love Majima's character in this game. He's got a sense of optimism and joy that's just infectious, almost like all this pirate stuff is just a fun game of dress up for him. And the reveal towards the end of the game that he got his memory back and had been faking it felt in character and avoided making that story device feel cheap. Even without the context of other Yakuza games, you really have become attached to Pirate's setting and cast by the end of the game. But from the moment Saejima shows up and tries to take Majima home to Japan, there's this air of the game acknowledging that everything's not going to last forever that I really appreciated, and it made the ending bittersweet. That same feeling leads into the post-credit scene with a great conversation between Majima and Saejima about leaving your dreams for the young, as well as a reveal that will probably mean more to longtime fans, but I don't know, man, I just got here. Pirate Yakuza story felt like a fun movie inside of a video game without all of the push the left stick to climb stuff. And by the end, I was legitimately sad that we'll probably never see any of these characters ever again, even if some of them were a little bit cookie cutter. However, despite the narrative being shorter than most mainline entries, the actual game is fucking massive, although I have to say that the opening hour of Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii is almost a concentrated elixir of all of my frustrations with this franchise. You're stuck in a restricted area with very little to do in the opening hour besides the main objective, yet you're given the illusion of an open area. You have the ability to walk, just only for about 2 seconds to the next cutscene that will just repeat what the last one said, just in more detail. Not to mention lots and lots and lots of tutorials at the very beginning, as well as in-universe cutscenes where the characters also explain the same gameplay systems to you. It's not outright bad, it's just a fucking slog. If the game were complicated, I'd at least understand the need to constantly explain everything to the player, but everything from the combat to manning the Goromaru feels very streamlined and fluid. Even without comparing it to previous titles, Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii's combat is so fun that I actively wanted to learn all the different moves and abilities in combat. It lacks that chug that some of the older Yakuza games had. The only thing that still felt a little bit slow is jumping, which is a shame since that's used in some of the best combos in the game. But all the other stuff, the weak and heavy attacks, the pistol, the hook, it's all fast and very, very satisfying. There's only 2 different fighting styles in this game, Mad Dog, which is a fast brawling style closer to past installments, and Sea Dog, the new pirate style that's much slower, deals heavier damage, and offers a bit more in weapon variety, since it has a pistol as well as a hook to draw you closer to enemies. I could tell that I like the combat a lot more this time, since I actively wasn't avoiding fights like I would in a game like Zero. That's not to say that Zero's combat was bad, it just pales in comparison to Pirate Yakuza. I even love when the game would shake up combat a bit, like these sections where you'd swashbuckle on top of the mast of a ship. It was so fucking cool the first time I did it, man. Upgrading in the Yakuza games has usually been easier than most action titles, since you typically just have to spend money, and this game is no different. Between upgrading Goro himself as well as the Goromaru, you usually just spend the cash that you get from the open world. Except there's also reputation points tied to how well known of a pirate you are. Essentially, completing objectives across the map will give you more reputation, allowing you to buy bigger and better equipment for the ship, and new moves for Goro. And you do this by mainly doing side activities and sub-stories. There's 3 different explorable towns: Rich Island, Mad Atlantis, this game's equivalent to Tortuga, and Honolulu, as well as multiple explorable open zones of the ocean, but the majority of the game's content is in Honolulu, which is a decently sized map to say the least. I gotta say that recently I've been pretty burnt out on open worlds, and I feel like a lot of people feel the same way, which is why these smaller open zones seem to be the thing that most devs are pushing for. But despite its pretty big size, Honolulu is such a great world. Partly because it's got that Yakuza trick of being so densely packed with things to do, but also because of just how good RGG Studio did at adapting this island. A few years ago, I actually took an impromptu trip to Hawaii. It was pretty significant for me, my partner, and my family, since none of us had ever really flown out of the country before. And I gotta tell ya, I fucking loved it, man. I mostly spent my days just walking around the streets near my hotel, taking in the beautiful sights, as well as constantly hitting up the ABC stores that are liberally placed throughout the island, mostly surviving off of cans of Kona coffee as well as their very cheap hot dogs or Spam musubi. I even went to this underground mall not far from our hotel and spent an entire day there shopping and eating new dishes I'd never had before and just soaking in that vacation atmosphere. I've been on a few trips to other places like Texas or Seattle, but that Hawaii trip always sticks out in my mind. So when I began playing Pirate Yakuza and I walked into an ABC store only to see that it looked exactly the same down to the fucking price tags, I was legitimately shocked. The same for I went to that underground mall. Little Japan reminded me of this similar shopping mall that we went to on the lower income side of town that was unfortunately mostly out of business, save for this small family owned cafe that we went to. It's really like disorienting, but in a good way. I get that this is stuff that games do all the time now, but this sort of digital tourism is something that only this medium can really do. And I just appreciate that the setting of Hawaii is so detailed and varied. I like that you can say hi to everyone, and becoming friends with locals is an actual mechanic. That's just so damn cool, and without trying to sound like a pearl-clutching mother thinking about the children, it's an interesting juxtaposition to most games which treat civilians like cannon fodder. In terms of things to do, this map is jam-packed, from optional bounties, which are sort of like mini-bosses, to crazy delivery, the best minigame in any Yakuza game ever. There is no contest at all. It's a very self-aware play on Sega's other property, Crazy Taxi, down to the character Charlie looking very similar to Axel. Do not ask why I know him by name. There's Dragon Kart, a very slow mini kart racer that was good enough for a one and done. There's karaoke with lots of returning songs from previous games, more playable retro titles that I didn't really engage with, but it's cool that they're here. Photography challenges, mahjong, darts. There's Sicko Snap, a weird variant of Pokemon Snap where you're on rails taking pictures of men in Speedos so you can send them to the police. And this is all just one island. That's only barely scratching the surface of what you can do. As good as all this optional stuff is, in any other game, most of this would just register as fun fluff. But they're all backed up by the ability to hire almost all of these quest givers as members of your crew. So if you happen to like a character or a side activity, then there's much more incentive to completing it without feeling like it's too distracting from the main game, and I love that. Of course, there's also sub-stories, which are story side quests based around a specific character. I didn't do very many of these, but the game does offer quite a lot of them. Although that's not to say that the side stories that I did do were bad, not at all. There's specifically one larger sub-story consisting of multiple missions where you speak to 5 models who are based off of real-life famous women, including well-known streamer Shibuya Kaho, in order to set them up with your first mate, Masaru, who's looking for a boyfriend-free girl. And I shit you not, when you complete all the missions, it ends with a live-action, in-universe version of The Bachelor? This is the sort of shit I love to be blindsided by in games. There is at least, like, 20 minutes of footage in this one mission, man. If 2023 had Alan Wake 2's Herald of Darkness, 2025 gets Yakuza Bachelor. And the best part is that nothing you do changes the ending of Masaru completely fucking up every single interaction he has with the women, and you end up gaining 5 new crew members. So at least you're fairly compensated. I was a bit concerned about the actual pirate portion of the game, mainly because, something I should admit, I fucking love pirates. I adore the Disney Pirates trilogy. Black Flag is still one of the best games ever made, and one of my very first videos that I ever uploaded to this very channel was me taking down my Mega Bloks pirate ship display. Needless to say, I have yearned for another big-scale pirate game that wasn't just always online. And Pirate Yakuza is kind of that. It's a bit more arcadey than you'd expect, but it damn did it scratch an itch. It was a bit weird that the ship controls like a car since you can reverse it. It was very odd. Also, I think naval combat is a little too reliant on the boost and drift mechanic, which is ridiculous to say out loud. I had a lot of whiplash when I saw an enemy boat do sick drifts in the middle of a maelstrom for the first time, but in the end, the combat is still very fun, and it did require a bit of strategy, at least in the beginning of the game. When you first get on the ship, it introduces this rocket launcher that you can use, as well as this whole tutorial on reviving crew members if they're down during a naval battle. And yet, I never used either of these until the final battle, because once you level your ship up enough about halfway through the game, you sort of don't have to try anymore. But thankfully it is still fun. But to be fair, I'm very biased. And Pirate Yakuza also offers quite a bit to do in terms of additional side quests at sea as well. There's an entire enemy faction of pirates known as the Devil Flags that you can take down, as well as collectible weapons for special moves and islands filled with buried treasure, as well as islands that have no combat at all and you can just explore and fish on them. I That's kind of awesome. But the best side activity of them all is obviously the Pirates Coliseum, which are mostly optional boss fights starting with naval combat and ending with boarding the enemy ship. And let me tell you, it never got old, mostly because it doesn't last that long when your ship is highly leveled like mine was. There is cooking, which is such a fun minigame. I usually don't like cooking minigames, but I really loved it this time around. Other than that, there's crew management, but it seems a lot less hands-on than previous Yakuza management minigames. It's very easy as long as you're paying attention to a crew member's strengths when placing them on assignments, as well as giving them a lot of gifts in the beginning to upgrade them faster. But I do appreciate that there's lots of little mechanics and things added on the ship to make your crew feel more important, like being able to party with them after a success, or them posing for a picture whenever you take selfies with them. Little additions like that changes these from random NPCs to my crew, and it gives the game such a strong sense of personality. Although, the lack of any sea shantings is fucking upsetting. Where is Bully in the Alley? Speaking of which, the Yakuza franchise is known for having amazing music, both the orchestral soundtrack that plays during the game, as well as the vocal karaoke tracks. Those are all great in Pirate Yakuza. That main theme is a fucking earworm, and I love that now you can play songs on a portable MP3 player, both from previous Yakuza games, as well as a wide variety of tracks from random Sega titles. Even fucking Feel the Magic XYXX. Hey, at least they acknowledge that game for the first time in forever. But I will say that there are some tracks in the game that will randomly try to sound like a rap beat, just with a lot of randomly placed hi-hats that make it sound like that beat from the Miles Morales game, so those were a little bit distracting. I love Like a Dragon Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, but that fucking title is ridiculous. This game has ruined my life completely, solely because I love it that much. I'm already itching to jump into Yakuza 0 for the 5th time, crossing my fingers that I'll complete it this time around. But I just know that it won't be able to reach the heights of this game. Man, RGG Studios just sort of shot themselves in the foot. It's hard to go back to the rest of the franchise and not think about how good this is. But that's a concern for the next spin-off title, whatever the hell it'll be. If you like pirate games and have also felt that same hole in your chest since 2014, or if you like Yakuza, I guess, I cannot recommend this game enough. There's so much here to do that you'll be occupied for a very long time. Maybe this is the game that will finally get potential fans, including myself, to take the plunge into the mainline titles, but only time will tell.
Fast is fun. Fast is knowledge. Fast is possibility. That's why Cox is introducing its fastest high-speed internet ever. Now up to 5 megs. So you can do more on the internet than ever before.